This is my review for Gardens of the Moon, Volume 1 of Malazan, Book of the Fallen. Let's jump into it. Hello everyone, my name is Marsh, and today we're going to be reviewing Gardens of the Moon by Steven Erikson, the first book and volume in the Malazan, Book of the Fallen series. This is a giant epic fantasy series, and I'm excited to get into it. I finally jumped into it after a long time, and so I'm going to give you my thoughts on it and how I enjoyed or didn't enjoy the first book. So this review is going to be spoiler free. If you want to see any spoiler-filled talk, feel free to jump into one of my live streams, which I am doing a book club for Malazan Book of the Fallen. We do a live stream every week. This week we just did a recap / character tier list for book 1, and then we're starting book 2 next week. So if you're interested in reading it and you want to get some spoiler-filled discussion analysis for each part, feel free to watch it. Or if you want to read along, tune in and join us. That's enough of the self-plug though. Once more, just consider leaving a like and subscribing if you enjoyed this review. But let's go ahead and jump right into the spoiler-free review. So what is there to talk about first when it comes to this? We'll just take it piece by piece. We'll go into characters, setting, plot, pros, and then any complaints, pros, and cons with any of those things as we go. So for a little quick summary of the plot and what you can expect going in without any spoilers, Gardens of the Moon is a book where you're dropped into the middle of a political war and an empire that's been ruling for 7 to 9 years so far, and you're looking at the political ramifications of that empire in this continent that it's dropped into. So it doesn't hold you by the hand. It drops you in immediately, doesn't explain anything, and you have to kind of pick it up as it goes. And that's partly the beauty and partly the curse when it comes to Malazan. Part of it, what everyone talks about with the first book, is they're extremely confused and they don't know what's going on. I wouldn't say it's a very beginner series when it comes to epic fantasy. If you haven't read any fantasy at all, I definitely wouldn't recommend it for you right away, just because there is a lot of things that occur in fantasy from time to time that you would like to have an understanding of to go forward with it. And there are certain things you get when you're reading fantasy for a while that just make it easier when you're reading other series. So with Malazan, it's the part of the difficulty is the density of the world, which is also a immense pro when it comes to epic fantasy and just reading fiction in general. The world building is pristine in Malazan. It's amazing. So the thing that happens that bogs down a lot of people when they're reading is every single sentence. That might be an over exaggeration, but a lot of the things that are mentioned in this book are things that carry over throughout the series from what I've been told. And you're picking up on things throughout just the first book alone that is foreshadowed for the end of this book, for the end of the series. There's multiple world implications in every single sentence, and you get multiple point of views from different characters at different times. You also don't know exactly what's going on. The magic system of the world is never explained. You don't get that pause, let me have a training moment with this person to show them how the magic works. They just throw you right into it. And just to give you a brief idea about what it is, it's centered around a thing called warrens. So from my very, very brief understanding, warrens are basically like a portal that you can open. And when you open the portal, it is open to specific realms owned by specific gods. So, for example, there's a Chaos Warren. And if you open the Chaos Warren and the Chaos Warren embraces you, you can use the powers that are bestowed you from that Chaos Warren. And you can then, hence, use the Chaos magic. There's other things and other types of magic. There's summoning. There's shape-shifting. There's so many things, so many different species. It is a dense world with thousands of years of history already built into it from the beginning. Everything that's been planted in, though, is very intentional. If you're in a scene, things that are being said will probably be referred to at a later point. So it makes it very heavy to get into and a hard barrier for entry if you're not used to that. And also for some readers, they enjoy knowing every single detail at every moment. So if you're not the kind, I would say, to be able to just continue reading and be able to go forward in the story, not knowing if everything is clear, what exactly is happening, it's going to be a bit of a struggle at first, just because you do pick it up as you go. And it's not until later in the book that you start getting used to the magic. And even then, there's things with the magic that you don't fully understand that happens. So that's probably the biggest complaint I would say when it comes to Malazan. And one of my only cons is the barrier to entry. But I mean, it was easier for me since I had a group to read along with that were helping me out. Wasn't too much of a problem. But even then, when I was reading on my own, I picked up on a majority of it as I was going. You don't get the small intricacies, but you can pick up on the majority of it. Other than that, though, let's go ahead and talk about some pros, and we'll get into the other stuff as well. So, characters in Malazan. And so the characters are actually one of my favorite parts of Malazan. The first book is well known to be the worst or one of the weakest entries in the whole series. It's a 10-book series with other like side books as well. But the first book is well known to be the weakest. Part of the reason for that is it was originally written as a screenplay, and they were trying to get the screenplay adapted, and they weren't, so he decided to write it as a book. So it does read like a screenplay with scenes happening that like you would see in like a movie per se. So you go from one character's point of view to another character's point of view on the same scene, and you see different point of views when it comes to the characters. Now, some people say the character work isn't strong. I think one of my favorite parts was actually the characterization. Each character, there's hundreds of characters, but the characters that are mentioned and the important ones that you follow, there's certain ones that they get certain development and characterization that are just fascinating. Some of the best characters are ones that you have immense intrigue towards. Some of them are very twisted individuals that are just fascinating to watch. If that's for their reason or another reason that they're twisted, there's just extremely fascinating people in this world. Not to mention just the fascination, but the development of characters as a whole. Some characters during just this first book alone, you see the development from where they start out and where they go by the end of the book, and that character's already been on a journey and has already like developed into a new person, or not necessarily new, but into a mature version of themselves. So there is a lot of character development, and even one of the beauties I would say with the characterization is no one is fully black and white. It is a very morally gray story. An example of that is when you look at someone who would be said to be an antagonist, we have a point of view from one of the antagonists. However, when you're reading it, you enjoy reading the antagonist's point of view, and you enjoy that person's point of view, and it's actually one of my favorite characters. Not going to say the name, but then you also go to the antagonists in the situation, and they're not necessarily good people at all. Some of them are terrorists, some of them are thieves and assassins and killers, and no one is really good in this world. It's just the perspective that you're watching it from, to be honest. And so you have the morally gray world that we're in, and you're just rooting for the people that you're following, but they're not necessarily great people either. There's a few that I say, there's one or two people you can consider the true protagonists, where they're actually seen kind of to be the good people, but a majority of the characters are gray. They have flaws. There's more than one side to them, and things to learn. So that was one of my favorite parts about the series actually so far, is the characterization that was there. Even though I know people say it's weaker in the beginning, but that just gets me excited for the future because I thought it was already quite strong compared to a lot of other books. And now let's talk about prose a bit. I think the prose for Malazan, it starts off pretty strong, and then it tapers off towards the middle. There's a lot of great quotes and quotable moments, I would say, at least in the first book. Once more, like I mentioned before, the first book is kind of the toughest to get into. It's randomly in the middle of this total war and empire that's been going on for multiple years. And even, for example, in the next book, you're going to be with a totally different set of characters in totally different years and time frame, and you don't necessarily keep the same characters from book to book. So this story is really a story about the people in the world or the events happening, and it's just a view on that. It's not about, oh, this specific character that's carrying through the whole series. It's about the world of Malazan, or the empire of Malazan, and the story behind it. So you got to remember that when you're reading it. It's perspectives into different point of views. And it's all done very well in this first book, in my opinion. Even though it's one of the weakest entries, I still loved it despite the flaws. And I don't think the flaws were that huge, to be honest, in the first place. And they're not that detrimental to the story. In terms of like the plot for the story in the first book, there's definitely a plot there. I would say the biggest weakness in terms of the plot is probably the ending. It's just not very clear, the ending with the events that happen. If you have context towards the lore, the magic system, and everything occurring, you'll definitely understand what's happening in the ending. But as a first time reader, I didn't understand what exactly was occurring with the end. There's a lot going on. But I luckily had my book club to help me out with that. And it does make sense when you learn about it. And there's certain decisions that are made that are kind of like out of left field. You're like, how did that happen? One thing to note is this series was actually based off a D&D campaign. So Steven Erikson and Ian Esselmont, this is their D&D campaign. So literal parts in certain scenes are sometimes them rolling actual dice, getting a D20, and something miraculous happens. You're not going to know that when you're just reading it, but it does happen with this first book, and there are some out of left field moments towards the end that you're like, did that really work? What's happening there? So that is something to be aware of. Other than that, though, to be quite honest, Malazan Book of the Fallen, Gardens of the Moon is a great entry point to a new epic fantasy series that I'm already diving full headfirst into. I'm super excited to read the next series, the next book, Dead House Gates. I know it just gets better and better, so that's partly why I'm excited, because this book was pretty great for me so far. I would say in terms of like where I rank it on my reads for the year, it's probably like a B or an A, in that range. So it's not like my favorite thing yet, but it's definitely good. And it's definitely something that if you're an epic fantasy person, you will probably enjoy this world, especially if you're someone who's into grimdark. Side note as well, a lot of Malazan fans get upset if you call it grimdark. It's not grimdark. There are definitely grim things that happen, but the underlying message underneath Malazan is about hope. And that's usually a difference between grimdark and other fantasy, is that aspect of hope versus just horrible, horrible situations you're put in with grimdark. So it's not technically grimdark. The author doesn't like it being called grimdark, and neither do the fans. At least from what I've been told. So just to give you a heads up if you thought you were getting into that. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I can't wait for the next book. If you've read it, let me know what you thought about Gardens of the Moon. No spoilers for future series, and try to keep it spoiler free for the most part in the comments down below. If you haven't read it, have I convinced you to pick it up? Have I scared you and shied you away from reading it? Other than that though, I thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.